business, it's kind of like a beehive, a lack of clarity or vision. So let's talk about these 6 lacks. They're actually not that committed to it. When people understand what needs to be done and why, then the resistance goes down. I mean, you'll find that they're all heavily linked. So if that's a thing for you, check that one out. Lack of commitment, we're going to say love. It's because there's a lack somewhere in here. Hello again. As a business coach, I'm frequently asked, why do some teams struggle while others seem to succeed? And naturally, the follow-on question is, well, exactly how can leaders, people like us, make sure that they're doing the right things to ensure that their teams not only survive, but thrive, while avoiding all of the mistakes that lead to failure or stalls? Of course, well, the good news is there is a framework that can really help settle it in your mind, help you visualize it. So at My Daily Leadership, we've identified 6 key factors that I'm going to share with you today, factors that determine whether a team will soar or whether they'll stumble. We call it the Leadership Honeycomb, and it'll be obvious why, but in a moment I'll share with you what it is and how you can start to use it to elevate your team's performance. Now, it doesn't matter whether you're leading a small startup or a large and complex organization, these 6 factors I'm about to share with you really are the unseen forces that can drive team success. And that's exactly why we put together this episode for you, to help you stop managing and start leading by focusing on the top key 6 elements that will make all the difference in your team's performance and ultimately the organizational success. Welcome to Stop Managing, Start Leading. This is the podcast for leaders who need to stop managing and for managers who want to start leading. Well, I'm your host, Antonio Garrido, and I'm the founder and president of My Daily Leadership. I'm a serial entrepreneur, I'm a business founder, and I'm a leader just like you. 3 times book author, and I've led businesses from the ground level startups all the way to Fortune 60s with billions in revenue and thousands of employees. From tiny to huge. So what if I told you that the secret to exceptional leadership is much easier and much closer than you think? Well, every leader and every manager has the potential to become exceptional. The kind of leader that they, their people, and their business truly deserve. And you are no exception. You just simply need to discover the mindsets, the tools, and competencies and habits to unlock that potential. And that's where we come in. So before we dive in, you have one important task to complete. That's it, just one. And that's making a teeny visit to the subscribe button. So subscribe to the My Daily Leadership YouTube channel today for actionable insights and practical tools in our podcast episodes that drop every single week. And if you're listening on a podcast platform, well, we do recommend visiting the follow button. Both will help you level up your leadership, so do it now. Okay, I normally like to start these with a story. And I learned rather early on in my career that it's much better to think about abundance than scarcity. It's kind of a philosophy of me and my team and the whole business. So abundancy rather than scarcity, or abundance rather than scarcity. About the things that we have rather than things that we don't have. So as a consequence of that, I don't really talk much about the principle of lack. But sometimes when we are trying to figure out why there is a lack in one area, it's because there are lacks in other areas. In other words, if we're struggling with growth or profit or top line or change or whatever, the lack of growth, for example, it's because there are lacks elsewhere. And a chairman of mine once asked me one day why sales were down. Well, said I, it's because the sales team aren't really performing. Rather naive answer. And he said, okay, well, why aren't they performing? Well, I think it's because they're demotivated, I said. Okay, well, why are they demotivated? He asked. Well, I guess it's because new product development is struggling and maybe we're losing some market share. I hoped that was the end of that. But then he said, well, why is new product development struggling? And then I said, well, I guess it's because the marketing function hasn't properly identified the new products that our customers and, that our sales guys are looking for, and we haven't properly industrialized the manufacture of them. I was sure that was the answer. Well, why haven't they? He asked. Well, I guess because it wasn't on the marketing team's prime objectives, I suppose. Well, why wasn't it on the marketing team's prime objectives? Well, I guess because I thought we had some other priorities. And then he said, well, do we really have other priorities in the marketing department other than supporting the top and bottom line? No, I don't suppose we do, said I. So he said, okay, I'm hoping you get the idea. Lacking one spot revealed a consequence of lacking others. So we fixed it really quickly. Now, before you think, oh yeah, I know what this is about, this is an Ask Why 5 times video. It really isn't. It's an everything in your business is really, really, really connected video. And when you see our model, I hope it will come very clear. So give me a few minutes and you'll see what I'm talking about. So if you typically join us on YouTube, you'll know that we always introduce you to a critical leadership model, sometimes two. Well, by drawing them out, okay? As I mentioned, we're visual learners here at My Daily Leadership, but if you are listening on a podcast platform because you're much more of an auditory learner, that's fine. But if you want to actually see the content we're about to draw out in real time, switch over to YouTube now, or maybe come along and watch again later. The models we draw in this episode and all future episodes and all past episodes will also be available as a complimentary download on our website, www.mydailyleadership.com/podcast, thanks to our phenomenal Cornelia. Okay, so let us begin. So to save time, I drew this honeycomb image a few moments ago. It's a standard honeycomb type thing with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hexagons. Difficult to describe, but if you don't have time to jump onto YouTube, then do download it. So, as I mentioned, save time, I drew this honeycomb image a few minutes ago, and that's why I said that business is kind of like a beehive in many ways. And we talk about a beehive a lot in the book, so if you haven't read or listened to the book yet, do that, and you'll see there's a big connection between what I'm about to show you and the stuff that we talk about in the book, or some of the stuff at any rate. So let's see if you agree. So we have our beehive here, if you like, and we're wondering, so the question we're asking ourselves today, because we always start with a question, but the question today is, why do some teams, and again, I can only apologize for my writing, and businesses therefore, right, and businesses thrive, and why is it that some falter? So there are reasons for that, and hopefully when we go through today's model, hopefully you'll have a couple of light bulb aha moments, and it'll point you in the right direction of something to pay attention to. So let's, in the middle of our kind of beehive, think about who runs all of this, but let's put leadership as a good starting point. Okay, so we have leadership in the center of our beehive, and then we have, some compartments on the outside. So let's think about these lacks that we talk about, right? So the business or the team is struggling to survive, struggling to thrive. It may be faltering. It's not moving as fast as you like it to be. Don't like to talk about things in this way, but maybe something's lacking. There's a lack somewhere. So let's talk about these 6 lacks and see whether any of these apply to you. So we'll start here for no particular reason, but perhaps it's for a lack of clarity, or I suppose a lack of clarity or vision. Perhaps there's lack of clarity and vision, and as a consequence of that, not everybody's pointing in the right direction. They're not entirely sure what they have to do. So maybe it's got something to do with that. I'll fill in all of the components of the honeycomb, then we'll come back and see, well, what does lack of clarity or vision mean? what does lack of truth and trust mean? How does that impact on the organization? And then, not for today, for reasons of time more than anything else, maybe in 3 or 4 episodes time, we'll do another session on exactly this model and talk about, okay, so if the issue is a lack of clarity or vision or trust or truth or whatever, how do I fix it? So today we'll talk about scoping out the size of the problem, where the lacks may be, and in a future upcoming episode we'll talk about, well, what can we do about it? Because it's okay knowing what the problem is, we also need to know what we're going to do about it. So okay, lack of clarity of vision, that's an issue. I've just mentioned a couple of times, I think, lack of trust, and related to that, of course, is truth. Here's something to think about. What percentage of the time do you think your people tell you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? What percentage of the time do your people tell you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? It's not as high as you would like it to be. Well, it's certainly not 0, but then neither is it 100%. Again, we talk about this in the book. Normally, people will tell you a version of the truth that they think it's in their best interest to have you believe. And that's only if they trust you, right? So you have to get over the trust hurdle before you can get to the truth hurdle. Another thing you might want to think about, we're not going to talk about it again today, but every leader should have a strategy for trust and a strategy for truth. If you don't have those, it's something to think about. Okay, so lack of clarity of vision, one reason that the company might be faltering. Lack of truth and trust is another reason. Again, these aren't in order. These are just kind of as they're coming out of my head. Another one, another lack, is a lack of alignment. Now, this isn't quite the same as lack of clarity or vision. These people know what the vision is, they have, but they're not aligned to it. So it's not quite the same thing. So alignment isn't quite the same as clarity or vision. Okay, what else could be a problem? Well, another issue could be lack of time. Now, I really struggle with this one because I have quite a fixed view of this as a principle. Sometimes people say to us, "Hey, do you do? Can we enroll any of our people on a time management program? Do you do a time management program as well as a leadership program, a management program, and all of that stuff, and coaching and stuff? Do you do a time management program?" And of course, we say no because there's no such thing. Why? Well, because you can only manage what you can control. Can you control time? Are you Doctor Who? No. So if you can't control time, then you can't manage time. So it's slightly anachronistic. I've put it on the model because what I'll suggest to you is this. There's no such thing as time management, but there is such a thing as behavior management, right? We all get the same seconds in the day, whether it's you, me, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Alexander the Great, Churchill. You get the idea, right? We all have the same seconds ticking away, day in, day out. None of us can do anything about that. But what we can do something about is the things that we do in the time that we have, right? So it's much more behavior management. But rather than splitting hairs too much, just for the purposes of today, let's put lack of time, because everybody kind of gets what that means. And we'll unpick it a little bit later on. So for any of you that have antibodies to that principle, so do I, but let's just go through it for the sake of keep going today. So lack of time. There could be a lack of commitment. So in other words, they know what the vision is, there could be a line to it somewhat, but they're actually not that committed to it. There is another episode coming up where we talk about commitment a lot. We talk about work ethic or commitment. Do we want people to have high work ethic, or do we want them to have high commitment? And are they the same thing? Well, okay, spoiler alert, no, they are completely separate things. Work ethic is not the same as commitment. And we'll unpick that in a few videos time. And then the last one, let's talk about the last lack. So lack of resources. What do we mean by resources? Time, effort, energy, people, money, perhaps, right? So there's a lack of resources. So one of the reasons that the business isn't moving as quickly as you like is because there's a lack of resources. Okay, so each of these lacks, whether it's clarity of vision, truth or trust, alignment, time, commitment, resource, whatever, each of those lacks reveals themselves in a certain way, as I mentioned. We'll come on to those in a second, and then we'll answer the question, why do some teams and businesses thrive and others falter? And then in an upcoming video, as I have mentioned, we'll talk about how do we solve all of those things. Let's just take a tiny short break. And during this break, I'd like you to think about, or rather, I'd like to share with you an incredibly valuable downloadable resource that we have on our website. Now, I know you're not supposed to have favorites. I have 4 children. You're not supposed to have favorites. Well, I do have a favorite. And same with our models, right? So you're not supposed to have favorites, but this resource is actually my absolute favorite. And that's because it allows you to start asking the kinds of questions that will actually transform your leadership and therefore your team's results. And that's pretty important. So before I tell you all about it, let me ask you this. What would happen if you were to ask your direct reports some really terrifically magical questions? In fact, the same questions again and again and again and again. If you were asking them some really, really terrific, smart questions, some really smashing questions, and you're asking them the same questions and again, what would happen? Well, their thinking would change. Well, how would their thinking change? And how would their behaviors change? Well, if they knew their boss was going to be asking them the same 10 or so really magical questions again and again and again, don't you think, well, a very leading question, wouldn't they start to change their own way of thinking? Wouldn't they start to seek out better answers to those questions that they knew that were coming as soon as they saw you walking down the corridor, or you asked them for a meeting, or you put something in their calendar? If those questions were great questions, would it change the trajectory of their days? I'll tell you a quick story. Albert Einstein, as some of you know, spent, I think it was 3 or 4 years, a professor of physics, big surprise, at Oxford University in the UK. For those of you that are in the States or somewhere else in the world, it's kind of like the Harvard or the Princeton or the Yale, one of those Ivy League red brick buildings, universities. So he was walking across the quad one particular day, and a student came running over to him and said, "Professor Einstein, I think you've made a terrible mistake." "How so?" says Albert. So she said, "Well, I've just come from my second year end of year exam that you've set, and I think you've made a mistake, because the questions that were on the paper for the second year were exactly the same questions that you asked me last year at the end of year 1. So I think somebody's messed up with a photocopier, because you've asked the same questions this year than you asked last year. I'm sorry to say, I don't know what we should do." And Albert Einstein said, "No, there's no mistake. We ask the same questions every year. But what happens is the answers should get better." And so what that means is that when we ask the same questions, I'm not saying that we're as smart as Einstein, but there's something to be learned from that guy. It's a pretty planet-sized brain, wouldn't you say? That he was asking the same questions all the time, but the answers from the people that were more experienced and spent more time with you and getting smarter, the answers got better. So think about that as you're thinking about this. So would this new, more development and forward-looking thinking, these questions that you're asking them, help them achieve more? Would it affect the quality and the scope of their outcomes? Well, I believe it does. It's a resounding yes. Okay, so the resource I'm talking about provides you with these 10 magical developmental questions that every leader needs to ask their teams. And if that means every leader, that means you. So this critical guide is designed for leaders like you, if looking to get to the heart of the issues that's holding the company back. It's really important to know that. So how do you do that? Well, you download the guide, you download your own personal copy by visiting allthew's.mydailyleadership.com, or by clicking the link in our bio here. And don't forget to share, as ever, your thoughts, questions and comments, and really your aha moments. And by the way, I've noticed that the questions are taking an uptick, and we love them, so keep them coming. There's no such thing as a dumb question, right? So any aha moments too, we genuinely love to hear from you. So let's go back to the honeycomb and see, okay, well, what happens when those lacks, how do they manifest themselves? How do they reveal themselves in the organization? Okay, great question. Let's go back to it. Let's take them in the order that we wrote them, I guess, would be a good place to start. So what happens if there is a lack of clarity or vision? I mean, it doesn't take a genius to realize that people are going to be confused, so there's some confusion, right? You all know what confusion means, right? Inefficiency. The organization won't be as efficient as it needs to be. There will be resistance to change, more resistance to change than normal, right? Resistance to change. Why? Well, because when people understand what needs to be done and why, then the resistance goes down, obviously. And then as a consequence of all of that, loss in momentum. So we won't be going as quickly as we could. I used to have the chairman of the board. So I was the managing director and he was the chairman of the board. And he likened businesses to trains leaving the station. And if you know much about trains, I confess I don't know that much about trains, but I get the principle. So you have a train stationary at the station, and at the front you have an engine. All the carriages are stationary, obviously. To get that train moving, you have to overcome a lot of resistance, right? Because everything's stationary. And I think it was Newton, second law, thermodynamics. It says that everything at rest or at motion wants to remain that way, right? So there's a lot of inertia. There's a lot of resistance to stopping that train from moving forward. So it takes an awful lot of effort, to get that train going, right? To start it moving. And it starts really, really, really slowly. And back in the old days of steam train, because that's how old I am, right? You'd see the effort and all the steam and all the noise and wheels spinning and all of that kind of stuff. But once the train had started to go and gathered some momentum, to keep it at speed, to keep it going and to keep it accelerating was really easy. It's really easy to, once it's going, to keep it going, but to get it going, it's really hard. So this loss in momentum or lack of momentum is a really important thing. We'll talk to you in a couple of videos time about what do we do about that. Okay, so confusion, well, you know what that means, right? Teams are not understanding the goals or the purpose. Inefficiency is wasted effort, right? Figuring out next steps. Resistance to change, just talked about that. Lost momentum, progress stalls. Okay, cool. So good. Let's go to truth and trust. What happens when there is a lack of truth and trust? Well, typically, am I going to get it in? Got it in. So we'll start, micromanagement becomes the order of the day. Nobody wants to be micromanaged. Nobody should want to micromanage. And if there's a lot of micromanagement going around, it's because there's some kind of lack of truth and trust, and everybody's overcompensating all over the place, right? Bad news. Silos. Silos are a killer, right, in organizations. They are the very, very opposite of collaborative working, collaborative teams. And collaboration is actually where real momentum happens in an organization. We talk a lot in our programs about how do we get collaborative teams, right? So silos are really, really bad. And then, of course, we have conflict all over the place. Conflict resolution, you find yourself constantly being judge and jury and executioner, and then, of course, as a consequence of all of that, low engagement. All bad stuff, all things holding you back. Let's talk about lack of alignment. Okay, lack of alignment, we then have people with conflicting, I'm not going to get it on. priorities. People think they're doing some things when they should be doing some other things, and the reason is because they don't know what they should be doing. But why don't they know what they should be doing? Because people aren't aligning with what they should be doing. Okay, cool. What does all of that mean? It means reduced productivity. These two, I mean, you'll find that they're all heavily linked, right? But in terms of lack of truth and trust and then the lack of alignment, you know, if you have disengaged teams, quiet quitting and all of that kind of stuff, psychological unsafe, all of that stuff lives here, right? So all of these things clearly are aligned. I meant connected or interconnected, and then obviously all connected in the middle as well. Low morale. If you've got a morale issue, you've probably got a truth, trust, and alignment issue. And all of that leads up to poor decision making. Maybe that's what's slowing you down, right? Or a combination of all of these things. Let's come back to this lack of time. Everyone's constantly behind the ball. So this is what happens when people are constantly chasing their tails, right? Firefighting all the time. We often hear things like, you know, I'm too busy mopping up the floor to turn off the tap. That's what that looks like here, right? So this is very short-term thinking. Short-term thinking, missed opportunities. If you have a look at a previous video we did, which was all about working on the business rather than in the business, what happens whilst ever you're working in the business instead of on the business, you start missing these strategic inflection points, these really critical opportunities that you don't see whilst you're working in the business instead of on the business. So if you want a little bit more about this missed opportunities, go and have a look. Go find that one. It's one of the first ones we did. So production quality, I'm sat much lower in my chair. Well, I don't know. Anyway, missed opportunities, lower quality. That quality, those quality spills, it doesn't just mean on time in full if you're a manufacturer, right? It also means quality, output from people, lower quality or more quality spills, lower quality in everything, in the output of people. And also we'll do a video on quality, I think, coming up pretty soon. We must, because quality spills are a super duper drain on any organization. We'll talk about minimum standards. We'll talk about you encourage what you tolerate. We'll talk about all of those kind of things. Quality is absolutely critical. And then all of that is dissatisfaction. Okay, cool. Two left. Let's talk about this lack of commitment. What happens with a lack of commitment? What does that look like? Well, it might look like high turnover. Those people in the UK go, oh yeah, no, turnover's good. Well, in the UK, turnover means revenue. In the States, turnover means people turning over, right? So high turnover of people is bad, right? Lack of commitment is high turnover. It's inconsistent effort. It's lack of ownership. Ooh. What else does it look like? Well, I guess really a fractured culture. We'll talk about how you help that with core values and all of that good stuff. But maybe there's a lack of commitment. And then, as I mentioned, we'll talk about the difference between work ethic and commitment. And then in terms of those resources, what you'll get is stalled projects. Lots of stalled projects, lots of deadlines missed and passed, and you know what that means. Overwork and burnout. In terms of overwork and burnout, and work-life balance and all, and stress and all that good stuff, we have a video of that coming up pretty soon, I think. 2 or 3 videos time. So if that's a thing for you, check that one out. Missed goals, obviously. And all of that turns into lower competitiveness. Where would that reveal itself? Probably in margins, probably in loss of market share, all of that stuff. Don't have to teach you that. It's fairly obvious. You know all of that stuff. So here's another way to think about it. If you want to think about it in this way, help you remember it, memorize it. And by the way, for all of these models that we do, draw, show you can download, it's terrific for you to actually sit with your team and draw these out, for you to draw it out for them on your whiteboard, on your flip chart, whatever, right? So draw these things out for your team. We're not just drawing them out for you, we're drawing them out for you so you can kind of internalize it and get it, but your people need to also. So maybe look at it, download it, print it, read it, alter it, amend it, adjust it, improve it. If you improve them, please send us a copy, right? We won't argue with you, we won't row with you, we'll thank you, right? Help us make it better for everybody else. Anyway, nice way to remember it. Lack of vision or clarity. If you want to think about it as light, truth and trust brings loyalty. In case you haven't figured out, they're all going to start with an L. Lack of alignment is linking things together. So this is linkages. Lack of time. We talked about that, but you get the idea. But anyway, latitude. Lack of commitment, we're going to say love. Lack of resources is leverage. So maybe you want to think about it as, the six L's, right? Light, loyalty, linkages, latitude, love, and leverage. Maybe that's a good way for you to remember it all. And we'll talk about what do all of those things mean. I think they're fairly self-evident. You know what stalled projects mean, right? I don't have to explain that to you. If I do, I can do another video on that if that's what you need. But anyway, so the answer to the question, if you haven't already figured it out, so why do some teams and businesses thrive and some stall and falter? It's because there's a lack somewhere in here, right? And who's going to fix that thing? Who's going to fix? Of course, all of our people are going to fix it, but it starts with you, right? It's your beehive after all. So I guess the answer to the question is, there's a problem in the hive. Well, whose hive is it? Well, it's your hive, right? So you have to do something about it. So this is where the problem is, or the problem is likely a combination of some of these things, but one of these things is where you need to start looking. How are you going to fix that once you've identified it? Well, we'll do a video about that in a few weeks. I think that's, what I wanted to say today. So let me just finish this off by saying thanks for tuning in. This is Stop Managing and Start Leading. And it's a My Daily Leadership podcast. So whatever your reason for listening, watching, tuning in today, well, thank you for that. And I do hope that this maybe offered you something of value, I hope. Even if it's just one tool, one tip, one thought, just one something that improves your leadership ability by just 1%. That's 1% today, and 1% tomorrow, and 1% the next day. That's how bees get honey. Remember, there is immense power in marginal gains over time. So there's also power in community. So please do share, as I mentioned, questions, insights, topics, suggestions, and all of that kind of good stuff. If you're watching on YouTube, just give us some comments. And whilst you're down there, give the video a like. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Come on, get on with it. You know you want to. We do this stuff for you. So the more likes and subscribes we get, the more of these we make. And so for our auditory learners, you're only getting half the story, as I mentioned. So please do head over to the YouTube channel where today's episode really comes to life with visual notes, models, and all of that good stuff. So all of the models, this one will be available as a complimentary download. All the W's, .mydailyleadership, all one word, leadershiphoneicom.com/podcast. So the next episode, we're sharing some critical career advice on how to navigate the relationships you have. You may not know it yet, but there are 5 key audiences. What are your 5 key audiences? Well, starts with you, so yourself. You are an audience of yourself. We'll explain in the video, right? So it's yourself, your boss, your peers, and if you don't have a boss, by the way, then it's your stakeholders and all of those senior people, right? Your peers, your customers and suppliers, your direct reports. Those are your 5 audiences. So tune in if you want to tune up your leadership progress. Did you see what I did there? I'm Antonio Garrido with My Daily Leadership. Thanks for being here. Until next time, by wisdom and effort, take care. Go be a good leader. See you next time.